Ted Williams threw his glove at the dugout wall and screamed at the top of his lungs, "I'm sick of this fraud. DiMaggio's streak is fake. The whole league is rigging games for him." It was August 12, 1941, and 30,000 fans at Fenway Park had just heard baseball's most controversial player publicly call America's hero a cheater. But what Ted didn't know was that a reporter's microphone had picked up every word, and his accusation would be broadcast on national radio within the hour, triggering the biggest scandal in baseball history, and forcing Ted to make the most humiliating apology of his life on live radio while 20 million Americans listened. This is the story of how jealousy turned Ted Williams into the most hated man in baseball, and how Joe DiMaggio's perfect response taught America the difference between a great player and a true champion. The hatred between Ted Williams and Joe DiMaggio had been building for 3 years, and by 1941 it was ready to explode. Both men were the best hitters of their generation, but they couldn't have been more different. Joe DiMaggio was quiet, classy, and team-focused. He played for the Yankees, won championships, and never complained about anything. America loved Joe because he represented dignity and grace under pressure. Ted Williams was brilliant, but selfish. He played for the Red Sox, cared only about his individual statistics, and had a terrible temper that exploded regularly. Fans often booed Ted because he argued with umpires, fought with reporters, and blamed everyone else when things went wrong. By 1941, this contrast was destroying Ted's mental state. Joe's Yankees kept winning World Series championships while Ted's Red Sox finished second every year despite his incredible individual performance. Joe was beloved by fans across America, while Ted was hated and booed even in his own city of Boston. The jealousy was eating Ted alive, and then came Joe DiMaggio's 56-game hitting streak, the event that would push Ted Williams completely over the edge. May 15, 1941. Joe DiMaggio got a routine single against the Chicago White Sox, starting what would become the most famous achievement in sports history. At first, nobody paid much attention. Pitching streaks happened all the time in baseball, and most faded away after a few games. But as days turned to weeks and weeks turned to months, America became completely obsessed with Joe's streak. Newspapers across the country tracked every at-bat on their front pages. Radio shows interrupted regular programming to give DiMaggio updates. Fans packed stadiums in every city just to witness history being made. The entire country was falling in love with Joe DiMaggio all over again, and it was driving Ted Williams absolutely insane. Meanwhile, Ted Williams was quietly having what should have been recognized as the greatest individual offensive season in modern baseball history. He was hitting over .400 for the entire year, something no player had accomplished since 1930. Ted's batting average represented incredible consistency and skill maintained over 6 months of pressure. But nobody cared about Ted's historic .400 average because the entire country was mesmerized by Joe's hitting streak. Every newspaper headline was about DiMaggio. Every radio broadcast led with streak updates. Every conversation in America centered on whether Joe could get a hit in one more game. Ted felt like his greatest achievement was being completely ignored because of Joe's publicity stunt. As Ted's jealousy grew stronger every day, he began convincing himself that Joe's streak wasn't legitimate. July 15, 1941, Red Sox clubhouse before a game against Detroit. Ted Williams was pacing back and forth, ranting to his teammates about the media attention Joe DiMaggio was receiving. "This is insane," Ted shouted, waving a newspaper with Joe's picture on the front page. "I'm hitting .400 for the whole season, which hasn't been done in over 10 years, and all anyone talks about is DiMaggio getting 1 hit per game." His teammate Bobby Doerr tried to calm him down. "Come on, Ted. Getting hits in 40-something straight games is pretty incredible too." But Ted was convinced there was something suspicious about Joe's success. "Think about it," Ted said, his voice getting more agitated. "Pitchers want to be part of history. They're probably throwing him easier pitches than they'd throw to anyone else. The whole thing is rigged for publicity." Ted's teammates exchanged worried glances. They could see that jealousy was consuming their star player, but they also knew there was no reasoning with Ted when he made up his mind about something. August 1, 1941. Red Sox versus Yankees at Fenway Park. This series would be the breaking point for Ted Williams' sanity. Ted was hitting .409 for the season, an achievement that should have made him the biggest story in baseball. But when he arrived at the ballpark, he found hundreds of reporters and photographers waiting not for him, but for Joe DiMaggio, whose streak had reached 50 games. Ted watched in fury as Joe calmly answered questions, signed autographs for kids, and handled the pressure with typical dignity and class. Every camera was pointed at Joe. Every microphone was extended toward Joe. Every question was about Joe's historic streak. Ted felt invisible despite having one of the greatest seasons in baseball history. In the first inning of the game, Joe came to bat with 30,000 fans on their feet and national radio describing every pitch to millions of listeners. Red Sox pitcher Mickey Harris threw Joe a fastball on the corner of the plate, a good pitch that required skill to hit. Joe lined it cleanly to left field for a single, extending his streak to 51 games. The crowd erupted in appreciation. Photographers rushed onto the field and Joe's teammates mobbed him at first base. But Ted Williams was watching from the dugout with growing disgust and paranoia. "Did you see that?" Ted said to his teammates, his voice dripping with anger. "Harris threw him a strike right down the middle. No pitcher throws strikes in that situation unless they want the batter to get a hit." His teammate Johnny Peacock tried to point out the obvious. "Ted, that was a good pitch. Joe just hit it well." But Ted was beyond reason. "That's not a coincidence. Harris wanted to be part of history. This whole thing is fake." Ted's voice was getting louder and more violent with each accusation. Other players in the dugout were starting to stare at him, worried about their teammates' mental state. August 8, 1941. The pressure on both players was reaching a breaking point, but they were handling it in completely different ways. Joe DiMaggio, with his streak at 54 games, remained calm and focused despite the incredible media attention and pressure. He signed autographs, spoke graciously to reporters, and prepared for each game with the same professional routine he had used his entire career. Ted Williams, hitting .405 and on pace to be the first .400 hitter in over a decade, was becoming increasingly bitter and paranoid. He avoided reporters, snapped at fans, and spent most of his time complaining to teammates about the unfair attention Joe was receiving. During batting practice before their next game against the Yankees, Ted made a comment to Red Sox manager Joe Cronin that revealed how deeply his jealousy had affected his judgment. "Skip," Ted said, "I want you to know that I think DiMaggio's streak is suspicious. I've been watching how pitchers pitch to him, and they're not giving him their best stuff. They want to be part of his record." Manager Cronin looked at Ted with concern. "Ted, that's a serious accusation. Do you have any proof?" Ted's response showed how far his paranoia had progressed. "I don't need proof. It's obvious to anyone who understands baseball. Real players know what's happening here." Cronin decided not to pursue the conversation further, but he was worried about Ted's state of mind and what it might lead to. August 12, 1941. The day that changed everything. Yankees at Red Sox, Fenway Park. This was the game that would destroy Ted Williams' reputation and teach America a lesson about jealousy, character, and sportsmanship. Joe DiMaggio came into the game with a 54-game hitting streak, just 2 games away from tying the all-time professional record of 56 games. The entire country was watching to see if Joe could continue his incredible journey toward immortality. The atmosphere at Fenway Park was electric. Photographers lined the field, radio broadcasters had special setups to cover every moment. Even President Roosevelt had sent Joe a telegram wishing him luck. In the first inning, Joe stepped into the batter's box to face Red Sox pitcher Mickey Harris. The crowd of 30,000 was on its feet. Cameras were flashing from every angle, and millions of Americans were listening on radio as announcers described the historic moment. Harris threw Joe 4 pitches. The first was a ball outside. The second was a strike on the corner. The third was another ball. On the 4th pitch, a fastball over the plate, Joe lined a clean single to left field, extending his streak to 55 games and moving within 1 game of tying the all-time record. The crowd exploded in appreciation for witnessing history. Photographers rushed onto the field to capture the moment. Joe's teammates celebrated as he stood safely on first base, just 1 game away from baseball immortality. But Ted Williams was watching from the Red Sox dugout with pure hatred and rage burning in his eyes. "This is unbelievable." Ted screamed at his teammates, his voice filled with venom. Harris threw him a meatball right down the middle. No pitcher throws strikes in that situation unless they want the batter to get a hit. Ted's teammates tried to ignore his outburst, but Ted was just getting started. The 3 years of jealousy and resentment were about to explode in the most destructive way possible. "Can't you see what's happening here?" Ted continued, his voice getting louder and more agitated. "The whole league is helping DiMaggio. Pitchers are throwing him strikes. They wouldn't throw to anyone else. It's not baseball, it's show business. By the seventh inning, Joe's streak had reached 56 games, tying the all-time record. The crowd was in a frenzy of excitement, and the pressure for tomorrow's game, where Joe would try to break the record, was already building. That's when Ted Williams completely lost his sanity. As Joe DiMaggio jogged off the field after making a spectacular defensive play, Ted Williams threw his glove at the dugout wall with all his strength and screamed loud enough for the entire ballpark to hear. "I'm sick of this fraud. DiMaggio's streak is fake. The whole league is rigging games for him." The noise level at Fenway Park dropped dramatically as 30,000 fans heard Ted's explosive accusation. Players in both dugouts turned to stare in shock. Photographers immediately began taking pictures of Ted's angry, contorted face. But most importantly, a radio reporter's microphone, positioned near the Red Sox dugout to capture crowd noise, picked up every word of Ted's outburst for broadcast across America. Ted wasn't finished. 3 years of jealousy and bitterness poured out of him in a torrent of accusations that would destroy his reputation forever. "Everyone with half a brain knows it's rigged," Ted continued screaming, his voice carrying clearly throughout the stunned ballpark. "Pitchers are helping him. Umpires are giving him calls. The commissioner probably told everyone to make sure his streak continues because it's good for baseball." The Red Sox dugout had gone completely silent. Ted's teammates were staring at him in horror, understanding that their star player had just committed professional suicide on national radio. "I'm hitting .400 for the whole damn season," Ted screamed, his face red with rage. "That's real achievement. That takes skill and consistency every single day for 6 months. DiMaggio gets 1 lucky hit per game, and everyone treats him like he's Babe Ruth. It's a joke. The whole thing is fake." By this point, several Red Sox players were trying to quiet Ted down, but he pushed them away and continued his public meltdown. "DiMaggio's just a lucky fraud who gets help from everyone," Ted concluded his rant. "His streak is nothing but smoke and mirrors. Real baseball fans know who the better hitter is." The damage was done. Within minutes, radio stations across America were broadcasting Ted Williams' explosive accusations. By evening, every newspaper in the country would be preparing front-page stories about the biggest scandal in baseball history. August 13, 1941, morning headlines across America. Every major newspaper in the country carried Ted Williams' accusations as their lead story. Ted Williams calls DiMaggio a fraud. Red Sox star claims hitting streak is rigged. Williams accuses entire league of helping DiMaggio. Baseball scandal, Ted says Joe's streak is fake. The reaction from fans, media, and fellow players was immediate and devastating for Ted Williams. Radio call-in shows were flooded with angry fans demanding Ted be suspended from baseball. Sports columnists across the country condemned Ted's poor sportsmanship and lack of evidence for his serious accusations. Even Red Sox fans who should have supported their own player were embarrassed and angry that Ted had humiliated their team with his jealous outburst. Joe DiMaggio's response to Ted's accusations was absolutely perfect and showed exactly why America loved him. When reporters surrounded Joe asking for his reaction to Ted's explosive claims, Joe delivered a response that demonstrated pure class and dignity. "Ted Williams is one of the greatest hitters in baseball history. I have tremendous respect for his ability and his achievements. I won't comment on what he said yesterday, but I believe my performance on the field speaks for itself. I've always tried to play baseball the right way, and I'll continue to do that regardless of what anyone says about me." Joe's gracious, dignified response made Ted look even worse by comparison. Here was America's hero taking the high road and showing respect for his accuser, while Ted had thrown baseless accusations like a jealous child having a temper tantrum. August 15, 1941, Yankee Stadium. Joe DiMaggio's real response to Ted Williams' accusations wasn't made with words, it was made with his bat, and it was devastating. Playing against the Philadelphia Athletics with the entire country watching because of Ted's claims, Joe DiMaggio had what many consider the greatest single game of his entire Hall of Fame career. Joe went 4 for 4 with 2 home runs, a triple, and a single. He drove in 6 runs, scored 4 times, and made 2 spectacular defensive plays that brought the crowd to its feet. It was a performance that demonstrated conclusively that Joe DiMaggio was not only legitimate but was playing at a level that nobody could match. After the game, reporters again asked Joe about Ted's accusations. His response remained perfect in its dignity and class. "I just try to play baseball the right way every single day. I compete as hard as I can, respect my opponents, and let the results speak for themselves." That's all I've ever done, and that's all I'll ever do. Meanwhile, Ted Williams was learning the hard way that making accusations without proof destroys the accuser's reputation far more than it damages the accused. Fans booed him mercilessly in every city the Red Sox visited. His own teammates were avoiding him, embarrassed to be associated with his behavior. Even Red Sox management was distancing itself from Ted's comments. August 20th, 1941, the pressure on Ted Williams was becoming unbearable, but his pride and stubbornness made it impossible for him to admit he had made a terrible mistake. When reporters asked if he regretted his accusations against Joe DiMaggio, Ted doubled down on his claims in a way that made his situation even worse. "I stand by everything I said about DiMaggio's streak being suspicious. Real baseball people who understand the game know that something isn't right about this whole situation. I'm not going to take back the truth just because it's unpopular with fans who don't understand what they're watching." Ted's refusal to apologize or show any remorse transformed the story from a sports controversy into a character assassination. Now it wasn't just about baseball statistics. It was about Ted Williams as a person, his integrity, and his fitness to represent professional baseball. August 25th, 1941, the day Ted Williams learned that some accusations are so serious they demand definitive proof. St. Louis Browns manager Luke Sewell, who had been following the controversy closely, made an announcement that would settle the matter once and for all. "Today we're going to prove that Ted Williams is completely wrong about Joe DiMaggio getting help from opposing pitchers. We're going to pitch to DiMaggio with our absolute best stuff, trying to get him out with everything we have. Let's see if he's really the fraud that Ted Williams claims he is." This was the test Ted had unknowingly demanded. The Browns would treat Joe exactly the same way they treated Ted Williams as a dangerous hitter who needed to be challenged with their best pitches. Browns pitcher Bob Muncrief, one of the most competitive and skilled pitchers in the American League, took the mound that day with explicit instructions to give Joe DiMaggio nothing easy and to try his absolute hardest to end the hitting streak. In Joe's first at-bat, Muncrief threw him 5 pitches, 2 fastballs on the corners, 2 curveballs that just missed the strike zone, and a changeup that Joe barely fouled off. On the 6th pitch, another corner fastball, Joe lined a clean single to right field. In Joe's second at-bat, Muncrief was even more determined. He threw Joe 7 pitches, all of them quality strikes or close balls that could have been called either way. Joe fouled off 5 of them, took one for a ball, then drilled a line drive off the right field wall for a double. By Joe's third at-bat, it was clear that Muncrief was giving Joe everything he had, trying desperately to prove that DiMaggio could be stopped by elite pitching. But Joe responded with a towering home run that cleared the left field fence by 50 feet. Ted Williams, who was listening to the game on radio in Boston, realized in that moment that his accusations had been completely and definitively disproven. Joe DiMaggio had just gotten 3 hits against a pitcher who was specifically trying to show that Joe couldn't handle top-level competition. But Ted's pride still wouldn't allow him to admit his mistake publicly. September 2nd, 1941, Baseball Commissioner Kennesaw Mountain Landis, who had been conducting a thorough investigation of Ted Williams' accusations for 2 weeks, released an official statement that destroyed what remained of Ted's credibility. After extensive investigation of Mr. Williams' claims regarding Joe DiMaggio's hitting streak, including interviews with players, managers, umpires, and league officials, we find absolutely no evidence of any impropriety, assistance, or conspiracy. Mr. DiMaggio's achievement is entirely legitimate and represents the finest example of sustained excellence in baseball history. Mr. Williams' accusations are completely unfounded and reflect poorly on his character as a professional athlete. The commissioner's statement was the final nail in Ted Williams' reputation. Now it wasn't just fans and reporters criticizing him, it was the official leadership of baseball itself declaring him wrong. Red Sox owner Tom Yawkey, who had been embarrassed by Ted's behavior for weeks, called his star player into his office for a conversation that would determine Ted's future with the organization. "Ted," Yawkey said sternly, "your accusations against DiMaggio have brought shame to this organization and destroyed your own reputation across the country. The commissioner has investigated and found nothing. You made serious accusations without any evidence whatsoever. Now you have a choice. You can apologize publicly and try to salvage what's left of your career, or you can find yourself playing for someone else next season." Ted tried one last time to defend his position. "Mr. Yawkey, I still believe there was something suspicious about that streak. I was just saying what I observed." Yawkey cut him off immediately. You observed nothing except your own jealousy. The commissioner investigated and found no evidence. Respected managers tested your theory and proved you wrong. You have embarrassed yourself, this team, and the game of baseball. You will apologize publicly, or you will no longer be a member of the Boston Red Sox. September 7, 1941. Faced with the complete destruction of his career, Ted Williams was forced to make the most humiliating phone call of his life. Joe DiMaggio was relaxing in his hotel room in Detroit when the telephone rang. On the other end of the line was Ted Williams, his voice barely audible with embarrassment and shame. "Joe," Ted said quietly, "I need to apologize for everything I said about your hitting streak. I was completely wrong. I let my jealousy and frustration make me say things that weren't true and that I can't prove. Your streak is legitimate, and you earned every single hit. I'm deeply sorry for questioning your integrity and for embarrassing myself in baseball with my accusations." Joe DiMaggio's response demonstrated exactly why America loved him and why he would always be remembered as a true champion. "Ted, I appreciate your apology, and I accept it completely. We're both fierce competitors who want to be the best. I understand that emotions can run very high when you care as much as we both do about this game. Let's put this whole situation behind us and focus on playing the great baseball that fans deserve to see." But Joe's gracious acceptance of Ted's private apology wasn't enough to repair the damage that had been done. The American public, who had followed every development of the controversy, demanded that Ted Williams acknowledge his mistakes publicly, not just in a private phone conversation. September 12, 1941. Fenway Park. Under enormous pressure from fans, media, his own team, and baseball's leadership, Ted Williams was forced to deliver the most humiliating speech of his professional life. Standing at home plate before 30,000 Red Sox fans and a national radio audience estimated at 20 million Americans, Ted delivered his public destruction. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to use this opportunity to publicly apologize for my recent comments about Joe DiMaggio and his incredible 56-game hitting streak. I was completely wrong to question the legitimacy of his achievement, or to suggest that he received any kind of help from opposing pitchers, umpires, or league officials. Joe DiMaggio is not only a great player, but he's a man of tremendous character who earned his record through skill, hard work, and determination. My accusations were entirely unfounded and reflected my own frustration and jealousy rather than any evidence of wrongdoing. I deeply regret my poor sportsmanship and ask for forgiveness from Joe DiMaggio, from baseball fans everywhere, and from everyone who was disappointed and embarrassed by my behavior." The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some fans applauded Ted's willingness to admit his mistakes, while others continued to boo him for the damage he had already caused. But the baseball world recognized that Ted had finally done the right thing, even though it had taken weeks of pressure and the threat of losing his career to force him to acknowledge the truth. Joe DiMaggio, who was in New York preparing for a Yankees game, issued a statement accepting Ted's public apology. "Ted Williams is one of the most talented hitters in baseball history and a fierce competitor. I accept his apology completely and look forward to many more great battles between our teams. This controversy is now behind us, and I have nothing but respect for Ted as a player and as a man who was willing to admit his mistakes."